Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. This time, we're tackling the National Rugby League.
The NRL.
And how it went from, a local sport to a global phenomenon. It's a story with tons of drama, huge rivalries, big business moves.
Lots of money flying around.
Yeah, clashing titans, all that good stuff.
Exactly. And what's fascinating about it, I think, is that the story of the NRL is about way more than what happens just on the field, right? Mm-hmm. It's the power plays, the decisions that happen off the field, the cultural shifts that turned it into this, billion-dollar success.
Yeah, so let's rewind the clock.
Okay.
Let's go back to the early 1990s.
The early 90s.
Back then, Australian Rugby League was run by, it was under the control of the Australian Rugby League.
ARL.
ARL, which had been in charge since 1908.
A long time.
It's important to understand that context, too.
Okay.
Because the ARL really controlled everything. Player contracts, broadcasting rights, you name it, they had a grip on it.
And, it was stable, sure.
Right.
But it wasn't exactly the most competitive or financially, savvy environment.
Gotcha. Okay.
Which is where things get interesting.
Yeah, this is where things get interesting. So then we have these two huge names in media.
Yeah.
Enter the picture. Rupert Murdoch.
Huge.
And Kerry Packer.
Right. Massive.
Now, these guys...
They're not small players.
Yeah.
They're titans of industry.
They weren't just like, oh, yeah, we'll invest a little bit in this.
Yeah.
They really saw the potential of rugby league.
Absolutely. And they understood the media. They understood the power of it.
Mm-hmm.
Murdoch, with his global empire, his Foxtel, he wanted those broadcast rights exclusively. Packer was already deeply entrenched in the ARL.
Right.
He had a lot invested in Channel 9 and the existing setup. He wasn't giving that up easily.
Yeah.
So you have this massive clash. It was a war.
I know a bit about the Super League war, but it sounds like this was about way more than just arguing over broadcasting.
Oh, yeah.
What were the stakes here?
The stakes were huge. Imagine a sport being completely split down the middle.
Wow.
Clubs had to pick a side. Players were being offered these crazy contracts.
Crazy money.
Yeah. And fans were just totally lost.
Yeah, I can imagine. Who do I support?
Exactly. It wasn't just about money. It was about power, influence. It was the whole future of the game at stake.
So for a period of time, there were two competing rugby leagues.
Exactly. In 1997, you had the ARL hanging on to that.
A traditional way.
The traditional way, backed by Packer. And then the Super League, which was Murdoch's vision. He wanted this, global, commercially driven spectacle.
For the 97 season was just chaos.
It was chaos. You had 2 drafts, players switching sides, lawsuits flying around. It was a mess.
And the fans, they must have been
confused.
Yeah.
Totally confused. It was clear that this couldn't last.
How did they even function? How did rugby league even survive that?
Well, by the end of that 97 season, everyone was exhausted.
Just completely drained.
Financially, legally, the fans were losing interest. It was time to come to the table.
So they made a deal.
They had to. There were these intense discussions, and they hammered out a peace agreement.
Okay.
It was fragile, but it laid the groundwork for what would become the NRL.
So the NRL that we know today is born from the ashes of the Super League war.
Exactly. In 1998, the NRL launched. It was a joint venture between the ARL and, surprisingly, News Corporation.
Oh, wow.
It was a complete restructuring. The goal was to create a unified competition, make it financially stable, and set it up for growth, both in Australia and internationally.
Okay, but I imagine to achieve that stability, they had to make some tough choices.
Oh, yeah.
How did they streamline the league?
It was a period they called the Great Rationalization.
Okay.
And it was really controversial. They started with 20 teams in 98.
20.
Way too many to be profitable. Their goal was to get down to 14 teams by 2000.
Wow. How did they decide who to cut?
It was complex. They looked at finances, market analysis, and made some really hard calls. 4 clubs ended up being shut down.
Wow.
The South Queensland Crushers, the Perth Reds, the Adelaide Rams, and the Gold Coast Chargers.
Enough for those fans.
Devastating for those fans. Imagine your team just being erased.
Gone.
Yeah.
Were there any other big shakeups?
Yeah, they also forced some mergers. Think about these iconic clubs, huge rivals being forced to combine.
Wow.
The St. George Dragons merged with the Illawarra Steelers to become the St. George Illawarra Dragons. The Balmain Tigers in western suburbs, Magpies, big rivals, became the West Tigers. And for a while, Manly Sea Eagles and the North Sydney Bears became the Northern Eagles.
A lot of change.
A lot of change.
How did the fans react?
It was a wild time. Protests, legal challenges, a lot of anger. But the NRL argued that these were sacrifices they had to make.
For the good of the game.
Exactly. They believed a leaner league would be better for everyone in the long run.
Okay, so by 2001, they hit their target of 16 teams.
They did.
What happened next? How did the NRL go from just surviving to really thriving?
That's where those media giants we talked about really come back into play. The NRL realized they needed to use television to their advantage. Make rugby league a must-watch event.
And this is where the story gets really interesting.
It does.
Tell me about those TV deals.
Okay, so in 2001, they signed this major deal with Channel 9 and Foxtel.
Huge.
Yeah, massive. It was a turning point. They secured coverage on free-to-air and pay TV.
So instantly more people can watch.
Exactly. And more money coming into the league really gave them some stability.
I bet that also gave them more power when it came to negotiating future deals and stuff, too.
Absolutely. And they didn't just stop there.
Right.
They knew that to really capture the audience, you need those big, exciting events.
You're talking about the State of Origin series.
Exactly. I mean, it's more than just a game. It's like this tribal clash.
It's massive, yeah.
New South Wales versus Queensland. Everyone gets so into it. It's a huge moneymaker for them.
For someone who doesn't know much about rugby league, what makes State of Origin so special?
Imagine the intensity of like a World Cup final, but with this fierce local rivalry.
Okay.
And it's played out over 3 weeks. Each game is just electric. The players, they're representing their home states.
Right.
They play with so much passion. It's more than just sport. It's this whole cultural event.
So they really tapped into that emotional connection.
Oh, yeah. Fans are so invested in their teams and their states, and the NRL used that to their advantage. They introduced these primetime games, Friday night football, Sunday afternoon footy.
Yeah.
It became a regular part of life for so many people.
So they weren't just strategizing on the field, they were strategizing off the field as well.
Exactly. They were thinking like a big entertainment brand.
And did that lead to even bigger TV deals?
It did. In 2012, they signed a deal worth over $1 billion.
Wow.
Then in 2018, they signed another one for $1.8 billion.
That is crazy money. What did they do with all that?
They used it to grow. They could attract top players, invest in development, and really expand their reach. It helped professionalize the game, improve facilities.
Right.
They were thinking about the future of the sport.
Yeah, making sure it could be sustainable.
Right. And they also started thinking beyond their traditional fan base. They started hosting games in Perth, Adelaide, new markets.
Reaching new fans.
Expanding the game. And then they had this brilliant idea, Magic Round.
What's that?
All 16 teams playing in one city over a whole weekend.
Wow.
It's a festival rugby league. Brings fans together from all over.
That's a great idea.
Creates this massive event.
Yeah, lets people see all the teams.
Exactly. And while all this was happening in Australia, something interesting was happening with International Rugby League too.
Okay.
Something that would really help the NRL solidify its global presence.
Okay, so I know that there are a lot of players from the Pacific Islands in the NRL.
Right.
How did that impact the international scene?
Well, you have these incredibly talented players from Tonga, Samoa, Fiji. They come up through the NRL system, and then they represent their countries.
Right.
And those national teams, they're playing with so much passion and skill. They've really challenged the traditional powerhouses of the sport. It's made International Rugby League much more exciting.
So the NRL is almost like a pipeline for international talent.
It is.
Yeah.
And that, in turn, benefits the NRL.
Okay. How so?
It attracts even more international players. They want to come play in the best competition in the world.
Makes sense.
So by 2020, the NRL had achieved this incredible level of global success.
Billion-dollar business.
Exactly. Record viewership, huge sponsorships, player salaries going through the roof.
Yeah.
They went through this turbulent period and came out on top.
Dominant force in rugby league, not just in Australia, but globally.
Exactly. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were challenges, controversies.
Right, of course.
One of those fascinating stories from this whole period is the return of a club that had been excluded during that great rationalization we talked about.
Oh, yeah, the South Sydney Rabbitohs.
The Rabbitohs.
I've heard their story. It's pretty incredible.
It is.
So they were one of the clubs that were cut during the restructuring.
They were.
What led to that, and how did they end up coming back?
Well, the Rabbitohs, you know, they're this foundation club.
Yeah.
They have a huge history, iconic colors. I mean, they're a big part of rugby league. But in 1999, during that rationalization, they were considered, you know, not financially viable. And they got kicked out.
That must have been devastating. I mean, how did their fans react?
Oh, they were furious.
Wow.
I mean, it was like they woke up a sleeping giant.
Wow.
The Rabbitohs fans, they just refused to accept it. They launched this massive campaign to get their club back.
Really?
Oh, yeah. It was a testament to what fans can do when they're united and passionate about something.
What kind of things did they do?
Protests, marches on NRL headquarters.
Wow.
They took legal action, kept it in the media constantly. It was relentless pressure.
So it was like a
David and Goliath.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Did the NRL just completely underestimate how much
I think they did.
the fans cared?
The passion was incredible. The commitment,
Yeah.
the sheer volume of noise they created. The NRL couldn't ignore it. It went beyond just sport. It was about community, emotion.
So they won.
They did. In 2002, after years of fighting,
Wow.
the Rabbitohs were back in the NRL.
Mm-hmm.
It was a victory for the fans and for tradition.
It's an inspiring story. Shows you that sometimes, even when it seems impossible, that passion, that persistence can win out.
It really can. And it's a story that I think really is central to the NRL. It reminds you that this competition is built on history, on tradition, and on the support of its fans.
Totally. So we've gone from, the Super League war, this huge battle, to these massive billion-dollar TV deals. It's been a wild ride, a story of, change, resilience, strategy.
A lot of smart decisions.
But what's next for the NRL? What does the future hold?
That's the big question, isn't it? I think they're at an interesting point. They're a global force. They've got money. The competition here in Australia is strong.
Yeah.
And they're growing internationally. But the world of sports is constantly changing. They have to keep adapting.
What kind of challenges do you see them facing in the coming years?
Well, there's always competition from other codes, right? Rugby union, AFL. They need to keep that balance between tradition and innovation.
Right.
And they have to keep expanding globally while making sure the clubs are financially stable.
Yeah.
And of course, player welfare, concussions, that's a big one.
Yeah, for sure. Now, what about expansion? Are there talks of adding more teams?
Yeah, expansion is definitely on the table.
Yeah.
There's talk of a second team in New Zealand, maybe in Wellington.
Yeah.
Perth has been in the conversation for a long time. And there's even interest in a team in Papua New Guinea. That would be huge.
Yeah, that would really change things. So big possibilities for the NRL. What are your thoughts on where they go from here?
I think they're in a good spot. They have strong leadership, passionate fans, and a product that people love to watch and that makes money, but they got to sit back and relax. They need to keep innovating, being adaptable.
Right.
They need to listen to the fans, the players.
It really has been an incredible journey, seeing how the NRL went from this, kind of fractured and unstable thing to this global powerhouse in sports and entertainment. We've seen it all, the rivalries, the money,
The tough choices.
the Rabbitohs comeback.
The passion.
It's a story about resilience and really smart thinking.
And it's not over yet.
Exactly. So what do you all think? What's next for the NRL?
Will they stay on top? Will new challenges pop up?
Expansion, new territories? Or will they focus on what they already have? We want to know what you think.
This is just the start of the conversation. Keep digging into the NRL's history and think about what the future might hold for this amazing sport.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of the NRL. It's been a fascinating journey. Until next time, keep exploring and keep the conversation going.